Dear listener, welcome to the second episode of the Marooned on Islands podcast. Last time, in the first episode, I talked about how we can navigate the inevitable isolation and loneliness we may feel during this time of social distancing due to the coronavirus. I introduced the idea of practicing being by yourself and with yourself, and how silence gives us the chance to do the invisible work of asking questions about what we really want in our lives. Throughout this podcast, I'm going to continue to offer my voice to whoever is out there who is feeling lonely or confused as we navigate ideas and topics that we don't see much of in the media or in popular culture. Such topics will include discussing isolation and loneliness, talking about mental health, and exploring emotional topics like self-growth, friendships, breakups, and love. I'll also bring in works of literature, music, film, and art to help us navigate these abstract topics and make sense of them. If that interests you, please like, follow, and subscribe for more new content. Last time, we talked about self-growth and the kind of work we can do internally to better ourselves. Today, I want to talk about how we also have a duty to work for each other. Let's talk a bit about what we as a community are facing when we are told to socially distance and stay home. You may have seen this meme that went around recently. It said, "Your grandparents were called to war. You're being called to sit on your couch. You can do this." And I thought it summarized a bit humorously the obligation we are being called to uphold right now. That obligation is social responsibility. Last week, I mentioned the acts of heroism we can observe every day as first responders and healthcare workers go to work to fight this virus. The meme points out, your grandparents were called to war. Throughout the 20th century, our grandparents' generation went to war. Every average Joe is called to defend someone other than himself. The consequences or motivating factors of those wars are a different conversation, but regardless of why they went, they made a sacrifice so that we, in our time, could continue to live freely. Our health, our happiness, our successes in life are always in some part due to the lives of our parents and their parents and their parents, not just our blood ancestors, but the generations before us who made sacrifices for a better future. That is a debt we can never repay, except perhaps to repay it by doing our own part in noticing and taking up the call of social responsibility. What is social responsibility? It is the duty that we owe to each other, to serve our communities as much as we serve ourselves. It is the balancing factor to the individualistic mentality we cultivate in the West. It's a challenge, instead of solely focusing on our own achievements, to help others as much as we help ourselves. I think the alternative to the question, what can I do to grow? What can I do to better myself as I engage with inward reflection? Is to also say, what can I do for others? What can I do to give to my loved ones, and maybe even give to people I will never know, the way our grandparents went to war to help secure freedoms for generations of people they would never know? When past generations were called to war, they were called across oceans to foreign lands, separated from their loved ones back home by the amount of time it took to cross a continent or receive a letter from halfway across the world. Thinking on this also made me think of how time and distance were experienced differently in the past from how we feel them today. This pandemic can show us how time and distance have changed so much across our history. In the old days, when ships sailed across the Atlantic to what Europeans would call the New World, the distance between places could be measured by the time it took to get from one place to another. The New World wasn't just a number of leagues away, the New World was months away. Anyone who knows America's history knows not everyone came here voluntarily or enjoyed freedom here once they did arrive. But for immigrants who chose to flee Europe for America, coming to America meant crossing an ocean. It meant months of long and difficult travel, and often with no plan to return, a one-way ticket to the promised land, a new land of opportunity where the cities gave way to great open plains and rugged terrain rolling west to an endless horizon. America was, and remains, a land where individuals can start over. Though the creation myth behind the American dream proved to be much more complicated and violent in our history than it might have originally seemed, this dream nevertheless called people to endure the long and difficult journey. The large amount of time required to travel that geographic distance allowed for a period of transition, where the voyager began to change within and prepare for his or her new life in America. Now, in our time, having developed new modes of transportation and technology, we can bridge time quite easily. Oceans which once took months to cross by boat, we can traverse today in a matter of hours by plane. And the patience once required to receive a letter from a soldier abroad is now eclipsed by online messages that can arrive in an instant. Time and distance between places have contracted, and so the spaces between ourselves and other people around the world have also contracted, bringing the world closer together. We can see the effects of this right now. Someone getting sick with the coronavirus in another part of the world can result in our neighbor getting sick tomorrow. But maybe instead of letting this contraction in time prey upon us as it has done with the pandemic, we can also play with the time variable in order to alleviate our isolation. On the one hand, the immediacy of our communication can actually help move our relationships forward very quickly. We can use instant communication to bridge the gaps we're all experiencing. We can video call into the living rooms of our loved ones, whether they are healthy or sick, a blessing unheard of during plagues of the past. Texting or messaging throughout the day and into the night can accelerate a friendship or a budding romance into something that perhaps would have taken many months of glances across a ballroom in Jane Austen's day. But we can also play with the variable of time to slow down. By returning to old-fashioned ways of living, such as calling by phone or even writing a letter, we may actually deepen our relationships. Though we are no longer cut off from each other by the oceans of time that existed between our ancestors, we also do not have to reduce our interactions to instantaneous memes. Making our communication deliberate, taking the time to connect even now when we have an excuse not to, can make our relationships deeper and richer. Your grandparents were called to war. You're being called to sit on your couch. You can do this. This meme reminds us of our social responsibility to care for those we do not know, cannot see, and might never meet, the way our ancestors did. It reminds us of our social responsibility in this current health crisis to stay home, and that yes, it really is something we can do. We can handle and overcome this. The projected number of deaths from this pandemic have gone down from millions to thousands. Although models and projections are never perfect, it seems at this point that maintaining physical separation and staying home has helped to save lives. President John F. Kennedy famously said in his 1961 inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." It seems like decades have passed since we have been called to any kind of sustained civic mindedness. Being asked to sacrifice for the common good is not a message we've heard from political leaders for a long time. The reason probably being that such a message would not have been too well received given all the pressures that individuals face today just to navigate their own personal lives. But in a moment like this, where we can see the interdependence between our own personal health and our society's health, we need the common effort of our hundreds of millions of people pulling in the same direction to beat back this common threat. We need to take up the call like previous generations did. There's a social media campaign going on out of New York State asking, "Who do you stay home for?" We can stay home for our immediate families, but we can also stay home for all the people before us who contributed to preserving our lives, our freedoms, and our futures. Furthermore, our social responsibility is not just to stay home, but also to make the extra effort to connect to each other when we are separated from one another. We are lucky that in our age we can play with the variable of time and put time to work for us to help us deepen our relationships, a blessing that our ancestors did not have. When you look outside and you see the world is empty, it's actually full of the love that we are showing to each other. Our ancestors took countless actions and made sacrifices that have benefited us. Now we have a moment where the sacrifices we make can actually thank and protect our parents and grandparents. Ultimately, time will judge how socially responsible our actions actually were. Our response will be measured not just by how well we contained the pandemic, but how we overcame the economic crisis created in its wake. Much work will need to be done to put millions back to work and to restore the livelihoods that were sacrificed. Hopefully, we will emerge with our will and our freedoms intact. But when we do go outside again, when the whole world can go outside again, there will be an opportunity for us to choose the kind of world we want to make out of this. This week, people around the world are observing holidays. Passover in the Jewish tradition and Holy Week leading up to Easter in the Christian tradition. The stories of both holidays can illuminate the plight of our time we are experiencing now, regardless of whether we ourselves celebrate either holiday. The story of Passover is told in the book of Exodus. It is the story of the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt and their freedom from enslavement. It is a story of liberation and a story of steadfastness. Despite being enslaved, the Jewish people kept their faith, and because of that faith, they were freed. During the holiday, the Passover meal ends with the saying, "Tomorrow in Jerusalem," looking to tomorrow as a brighter future. There is a lesson here about staying steadfast through hardship and about looking to the future for the promise of a new day and a better tomorrow. In the Christian tradition, Good Friday before Easter marks the day Jesus is crucified on the cross, suffering so that all humanity will have the chance for redemption. Easter Sunday, which is this weekend, marks the resurrection, the day Christ rises from the dead. The story of Easter is a story of rebirth, a story of redemption, and certainly the spring is the time when life renews in its budding splendor. In observing these holidays or recounting these stories, we can think about what it might mean during these challenging times to keep faith, to stay steadfast, to rejoice in renewal and rebirth. This transitional time mirrors the transitional time it took for the people of old to cross spaces and distances. Now, instead of crossing oceans to a new land, we prepare to venture out from our homes to reconnect to the world anew. When we come out of this time, whatever season it may be, our world will be coming out of a metamorphosis. During this time of transition, what growth will we have done to meet the new dawn? What tomorrow in Jerusalem will we be greeting? What renewal of ourselves will manifest? What world will we make anew? Let us take up our duty the way those before us did, by staying home and engaging with the time we have to bridge the distances between us, keep each other safe, and wait patiently for that moment when we can venture outside to create the new world to come. Sending out love and hope for your health and discovery. Until next time.